Good afternoon and welcome to our Pupil Personnel Services and Speech Language Pathology Programs Update webinar. We are presenting these two programs together due to their specific unique requirements to address. We are so glad to be here with you today as we continue to work together to move through the current issues in credentialing with the COVID-19 crisis. There have been and continue to be many changes during this time, and at the Commission, we have worked diligently to address these changes that this time has brought as they come in, often on a daily basis. Commission staff has prepared and presented multiple webinars for programs over the past week and a half, which are all recorded and available on the Commission page. So again, we appreciate this time to meet and address some of the pressing issues for programs at this time. I am Karen Sacramento, Commission Consultant, and I work with the PPS programs, and I'm going to go ahead and have others presenting today introduce themselves in the order of this slide, so starting with Cheryl.
Hey, I'm Cheryl Hickey. I am an administrator in the Professional Service Division at the Commission. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.
Hi everyone, I'm William Hattrick, and I am the consultant in PSD who works with the preliminary SLP programs.
I guess I'm next then, since Karen's already gone. My name is Roxanne Perdue. I'm a consultant with the Commission. I also do the PPS programs along with Karen. And welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ing Lindsay, and I'm a manager over in the certification division.
Great.
And I'm Terry Clark. I'm not on the slide, but I'm here helping run the Zoom from behind, and I'll be the one unmuting you at the end when we have Q&A.
Thank you. So, a few webinar norms for our time together today. As I'm sure you've noticed, your microphone has been muted upon arrival. Should you be called on to speak, you can select to raise your hand, and the moderator will go ahead and unmute your microphone, and then you'll be able to talk. We ask that for questions during the presentation, you do use the chat feature in Zoom to post your questions so that we will have a record of the question areas and the answers to post. And please do not feel the need to keep up with the questions and answers in the chat throughout the webinar. Again, those will be posted in an FAQ section that we will provide. We will address questions within topic areas, and again, take live questions at the end of the webinar, so there'll be plenty of opportunity to ask your questions and have them answered, and we will also be posting those so that everybody has record of that to refer to. We ask that you keep your questions to a general focus rather than program or candidate specific throughout our time together. We will share emails at the end for those types of questions. And to the extent possible in your setting, please try to avoid multitasking along the way during this webinar to ensure that you hear all the information that's presented. We're going to be going through quite a few different types of information today and moving on from one topic to the next. So we ask that you are present with us as much as possible. And then finally, we ask that you honor our time together, both for participants and presenters, so that we can cover all of the prepared material and get to questions asked. So our agenda for today, we'll cover multiple areas within SLP and PPS programs specific lens. Full documents cited in the PowerPoint and the PowerPoint itself will be posted on the Commission webpage, again, for your reference. We will be addressing general guidance for the field, and then Commission action on specific program guidance and general Commission action taken at the meeting last month. Actions that the Commission is able to do and will do. We'll share information about the program sponsor variable term waiver, PSVTW, and what those mean for these two programs. And then the responsibilities of different groups during this time. So program responsibilities, candidate responsibilities, and employer responsibilities. And then lastly, we will provide additional resources, COVID resources, contact information for the commission staff, and dedicated emails, and then again, those questions that we haven't gotten to or that you may have towards the end. Some general guidance in terms of what the CTC continues to do. We continue to really use an all-hands-on-deck approach to closely monitoring the status of COVID-19 and the impact of school and university closures on candidates enrolled in educator preparation programs. We are specifically concerned about candidates' ability to complete their educator preparation program during this academic year and be able to move on to next year and ahead. And so we will continue to look for ways to address this and to mitigate the situation in the ever-evolving landscape that we are currently in. So the Commission is committed to continuing to do the following: maintaining a COVID-19 webpage with updated information for all Commission stakeholder groups. This is almost updated on a daily basis as we get different information, and is kind of a wealth of our information that we have to share along the way. And as stated, this information changes as this crisis keeps unfolding and as we get more direction and information. So it really is vital for programs to stay current with these updates that we post as well. We will provide webinars like our one today and support to guide programs through this time. And as always, we will respond to questions from programs, program leaders, and faculty. So now I will turn it over to Ing in the certification division to address credential information and guidance and commission actions.
Thank you, Karen. I know this presentation is for the pupil personnel and speech language pathology programs, so some of the items on 3A may not apply to you or your candidates. However, these are useful options for your district or county for staffing needs in the fall. So we do welcome any questions and to point other analysts to these archived webinars. At the April Commission meeting, the Commission acted on a number of issues that impacted the applicants, candidates, and credential holders. So one of the items addressed was the basic skills requirement. This mainly applies to out-of-state and out-of-country prepared teachers and services candidates. The Commission acted to defer the BSR examination for applicants impacted by restrictions related to COVID-19. This deferral request must be between March 19th and September 1st of 2020. This deferral would not be available to any individual who has previously taken all 3 subtests and failed 1 or more. To request the BSR deferral, employers or educators may begin submitting a paper application immediately, and those issuance dates has to fall between March 19th and September 1st. We would need to have the complete application form 41-4, the processing fee, as well as supporting materials with the exception of BSR. Program sponsors that will be enrolling a candidate who needs the deferral of CBES would need to submit a notice in writing to the commissions via email to credentials@ctc.ca.gov that includes the educator's first and last name, date of birth, as well as a statement that the deferral is being requested on a starting specific date. Once again, the start date must fall between March 19th and September 1st. Individuals who have not satisfied the BSR will have that renewal code RC listed on their document. And once again, the deferral is for 1 year. Next slide. Extensions and renewals of credentials. Applicants are able to use the COVID-19 as a good cause for requesting an extension of time to complete the requirements. This extension of time is available to the following document: preliminary teaching credentials, as well as the services credentials for California, out-of-state, and outside the United States prepared. Hardships related to COVID-19 can be issued this one-year extension on an existing document. And to request this extension, it has to be submitted via paper application form. And in the top right-hand corner of the application form for appeal, please write COVID-19 to ensure proper routing within the Commission. The paper application must also include the processing fee, which is currently $100, and a written explanation from the credential holder. Next slide. Credentials and permits that are not eligible for extension. The Commission authorized the renewal of clear teaching or services credentials where the holder was unable to apply for timely renewal due to the health and safety restrictions in place related to COVID-19. Clear services credentials would include the PPS, the SLP, and administrative services credentials. Clear credential holders only need to maintain fingerprint clearance. There's no renewal requirements to extend. Eligible clear credential holders may submit a paper application form 41-4, processing fee, and a verification letter stating that they were unable to renew due to the COVID-19 restrictions. The renewal will be for 5 full years without a lapse in time, and employers are encouraged to speak to their credential holders to ensure that those who hold the clear credentials are aware of this option. And under this option, employers would not have to submit a validation of services request, and that the credential holder should not separately go online to renew their clear credential. Program sponsor variable term waiver. The Commission voted in favor of authorizing a new variable term waiver called the PSVTW. This is only available to credential candidates who were targeted to complete a Commission-approved program between March 19th and September 1st. The candidate must meet the following eligibility requirements. They were on track to complete the program by September 1st of 2020, and they were unable to complete one or more of the requirements, the clinical practice hours, the coursework, exams, or performance assessments. Additionally, it is possible for the program sponsor waiver to be renewed for an additional time if appropriate progress has been made. Next. So what is the PSVTW? This is a new variable term waiver that program sponsors can apply for on behalf of their candidates who meet the eligibility requirements as stated in the previous slide. The program sponsor waiver should be considered as an option for candidates after the completion of the spring or summer 2020 term. The program sponsor waiver will be made available starting June 1st. Initial educator preparation programs will submit the waiver applications and required documents for each of their candidates. Once the program sponsor waiver is issued, it will give the candidate 1 year of additional time to complete the remaining credential requirements while authorizing them to provide the services associated with their credential. Because the current public health crisis is evolving on a weekly basis, it really is impossible to predict whether the candidate eligible for the program sponsor waiver would be able to complete all program requirements within the 1 year term of that initial waiver. In the event that such hardships continue, the Commission could allow for the reissuance of the waiver with verification from the program that the candidate has made significant progress. There is further guidance on the Commission's website regarding the program sponsor waiver, outlining the program and candidates' expectations. Additionally, there is step-by-step instructions on completing the paper application for this new waiver type. And that concludes the items in agenda item 3A, and I will go ahead and turn this over to Cheryl.
Hi, everybody. So at the April Commission meeting, there were 2 parallel items that went together, and some of you probably were able to listen to the Commission meeting, and some of you probably couldn't. But essentially, the item that Ing just went through was the certification one, the one that dealt with actual individuals and what they can do or what we can do for those candidates. And then the 4A dealt with programs and what can we do in terms of flexibility for programs that are trying to get these candidates through this year. So we want to talk a little bit about item 4A. We know you have lots of questions about the program sponsor VTW, and we'll get to those questions as well. But we wanted to attack the problem from multiple different directions. And this was our opportunity to look at where there might be some flexibility for programs and where there isn't. So just to start, let's kind of explain what we can and cannot do. So when there's a statute involved, then the commission can't modify that particular requirement. You know, nothing that the commission does trumps what's in Ed Code. And so only two types of actions can modify those requirements that are in statute, and that is either the legislature needs to act again to either change that law or eliminate it, or there could be an executive order from the governor's office. There are also regulations, and those regulations typically clarify what is in statute, or they interpret what is in statute. And those are done by commission action. However, there is very specific procedures that must be followed in order to promulgate regulations. And there's timelines involved, very specific timelines. And that could be up to about a year to get new regulations in place. Now, there are emergency regulations that can be put in place, and those do also have a particular timeline and processes that need to be followed. Or we could have, again, the act of the legislature or governor take precedent over a regulation. And then there are regulations that are put in place by the commission that are not set or they don't come from either a statute, but they are formal actions by the commission, and those tend to be what you see in the standards. So our standards and preconditions tend to be a little hodgepodge of regulations, commission policy, and statute. So you'll see them kind of land in different parts. Let's go to the next slide. So program standards define what the program needs to offer and what the candidates need to know and be able to do. But generally, you know, we've taken the stance in California that how an institution does that is really up to the institution. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of how, as long as you continue to meet the standards, you know, different programs can do things different ways. And so there's always been a real recognition that programs need to be designed to meet the needs of their candidates, their local schools, that kind of thing, as long as they're meeting the standards. The commission sets the minimum criteria. And then where they may not make any changes is if it is in Ed Code or Title V regulations. So that's sort of the primer on that. We'll go to the next slide. So some examples of where we can't change because it is in Ed Code or it is someplace is you know, the requirements around some standardized tests such as CBEST, CSAT, RECA, the performance assessments for both teachers and for administrators, and anything else that is in Ed Code, and Title V regulations, specifically as we talk about the PPS area. So there are Title V regulations related to counseling, psychology, and social work, and we'll talk a little bit about those as we go through. So the commission took action in April to modify certain requirements that are in its purview and clarified program flexibility in implementing during this very specific period of time where we have candidates that were almost done with their program. So as we mentioned before with the variable term waiver, we're talking about candidates who were set to finish out somewhere between March 19th when there was a stay-at-home order and September 1st of 2020. We're trying to address those specific candidates. And as we'll talk a little bit later, obviously this situation is fluid and changing every day. And as we know more, we will be continuing to communicate with you and talking with the commission about adjusting as we go through. You know, if it turns out that fall has to be all online, then we need to look at fall again. But we wanted to make sure that you knew that we were really trying to deal with the situation at hand at the moment. The next slide. So as we talk about program modifications, that you are looking at, given your authority and flexibility that the commission has given you. We want you to kind of document what you're doing so that you know what changes have been made for the candidates at this point in time. So keep that documentation handy for you that outlines what kinds of changes you made, and in case we need it for further reference in the future, if we need it for accreditation in the future, those kinds of things. We just want you to have some documentation of what kinds of modifications each institution has put in place. Okay, and then I think I turn this one over to William, who's going to jump into the speech language pathology, and then we'll go to PPS.
Yeah, so this applies to our preliminary speech language pathology programs, and it is some information that has been shared before, and we're just reiterating it again today. That, you know, the commission did allow authority for programs to align their temporary modifications to those ASHA CAA COVID guidelines that were published on their website. And when you have access to this PowerPoint, that is a live link that will take you to that guidance, which I'm sure you're well familiar with already. And specifically looking at SLP Program Standard 6, which is the school experience standard, and it talks about how candidates need a quarter or semester of field experience in the schools. You as the preliminary program have the authority to determine when a candidate has met that clinical practice requirement. So if you have any other hourly requirements from your program, or of course the ASHA CAA COVID guidelines, that is separate from the school field experience standard that we're talking about here, requiring that semester or quarter of field experience, that you as the program have that flexibility to determine for each of your candidates.
So then moving to the PPS specific guidance. Again, we consulted with the national associations, and you really should look at their web pages and their guidance. They were linked in the 4A agenda item that was on the April Commission agenda. There is a challenge in that the clinical practice requirements still must ensure that the candidate does meet the Title V required clinical practice, and we'll go to that slide in a moment. Make sure you are clear with your candidates. If they have completed the program, go ahead and recommend them for the credential. If they have not completed and there's something else they need to do, they're 90% done, they're 95% done with the program, that's when you would recommend them for the PS VTW. If we go to the next slide, I want to explain about this slide. The green text is what's from the current in-place commission program standards. The 600 hours of field practice for counseling, the 1,200 hours for psychology, the 1,000 hours for social work. The black bolded text is what is in the current Title V regulations. Now these Title V regulations are quite old, but because they have not been superseded with new regulations and they've not been just retracted, removed from the regulatory process, they are still in effect. But luckily you'll see that in the total number of hours of field practice, the regulated number of hours is smaller than the Commission's adopted standards. The guidance that the Commission adopted is that you may flex your program that in alignment with the National Association. So the National Counseling Association, the National School Psychology Association, and the School Social Work Association. I want to leave the second row to the end because that's where we run into a little bit of an issue. In the current standards, all three types of credentials are required to have hours and experience in elementary schools, middle schools, and or high schools. You have to have the candidate have experience in 2 of those 3 settings. And number 4, the number of hours in those settings is a minimum of 100 hours. That's of the hours up at the top. So this is actually really good because what's in the Title V regulations conforms really nicely with what's in the current program standards. Number 5 is that your candidates have to have experience with pupils of variety of racial and ethnic background that includes being different from the candidate. In California, we don't really see this as a problem now. Our schools are very diverse in general. You do notice that the school counseling has 150 hours in the regulations rather than the 100 that's everywhere else. Then we get to number 2, the second part of number 2, the direct contact with pupils. 300 hours is in the standards and regulations for counseling and for school social work, 300 hours in both places. The challenge is that in the school psychology column, the program standards only require 300 hours of direct contact with pupils. The regulatory language still says 380 hours. Those regulations are going to be updated. New regulations will be promulgated, and they will be done in this next year. We're working on that. But at this point in time, school psychology candidates are supposed to have 380 direct contact hours with pupils. I don't really think that should be a problem for most of your candidates because they're in multiple settings of 100 hours each. They're going to have 540 hours at minimum and direct contact with pupils. Something we talked about with the administrator induction programs is they have a requirement that a majority of their program must be in face-to-face contact. And so 51% prior to COVID had to be the administrator and their coach in the same room talking to each other. Well, our direct face-to-face contact now is through technology. We have to be flexible on this. In the COVID era, this is direct contact. So don't be super, super specific and tight about this. Direct contact with pupils, school psychology does need more hours than is what is in the standards, but be flexible. This type of interaction, synchronous interaction between the candidate and pupils is the best we can do right now. That's going to have to count. If it ends up that you have a candidate that can't quite get there, I'm almost done. One more comment. If you have the candidate that cannot quite get there, that's when you use the program sponsor VTW document. Lets the candidate get a job, lets the candidate start in the fall. When the candidate can document the additional 100 hours or 50 hours they need, then you recommend them for the full credential. Now I'm done. Go ahead.
Carrie, there are a couple of questions. Do you want to take those now?
Yeah, let me read the questions and see if I can respond to them. Does direct contact with pupils for PPS school counseling mean in person in a school? It also includes synchronous online contact. We cannot go as far as to go to asynchronous of some sort, but online contact like this. This is as close as we are with direct contact right now. The social work only requires 900 hours, although May schools conduct 1,000. May schools conduct 1,000. Steve, I'm going to ask you to help me out, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the attendee list, and I'm going to ask you, Steve.
I think it's many schools, Terry, conduct 1,000 as part of that. I think it's many.
Yeah, that's right, Karen. Many schools conduct 1,000, but CSWE actually has in their language a minimum of 900 for master's programs.
And our regulations clearly show 450. So as long as you're above the regulatory language, the program has the authority to go with the Social Work Association. And when you feel that candidate is ready, you have flexibility now.
Terry, there's one up above from Suzanne about quarter and semesters and field experience. 155.
The 100 hours is still in effect. It doesn't have to be within a quarter or semester necessarily. If you're looking at this number 4, a minimum of 100 hours in an elementary or middle or high school setting, and a minimum of 100 hours in another one of those settings. So if you have a candidate who's only done 60 hours in elementary, you can't figure out how to get them the other 40 hours between now and when school closes, or between now and September, put them on a PSVTW. They have to get those additional 40 hours sometime in the fall and then recommend them for their credential. Okay, let's keep going and we'll answer more of those at the end.
Okay, so thank you, Terry. We're going to talk about program responsibilities, but before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that there are a lot of responsibilities for all of the groups involved. So yes, there are a lot of responsibilities for program, and we'll see, you know, most of our responsibilities in that area. But there are also responsibilities for your candidates, for the employers who ultimately, where they spend their clinical practice hours and ultimately would employ those individuals, including on your PSVTWs that you may request. So there are responsibilities for all individuals that are part of our credential process. So let's start with program responsibilities though. So one of your primary responsibilities for your candidates who are, I think, Terry said 90 to 95% complete with their program, would be that you would apply for a PSVTW. I guess let's get used to our acronyms. Variable term waiver, program sponsor, variable term waiver. And programs never had that responsibility or that right previously to apply for variable term waiver. So this will be new for you. So this would be on behalf of your affected candidates who haven't completed their clinical practice. You might have coursework that supports that clinical practice that maybe they haven't completed yet because it's connected to their clinical practice. So it would be those candidates, not those candidates at the very beginning of their program. But that's the type of candidate that you would apply for that PSVTW. It allows them to seek out employment right away. They can obtain employment, and they can be employed and working on that variable term waiver while they are enrolled in your program still and completing that additional clinical practice within their employment. So it'll, once again, allows them to complete their program requirements for your program. So as part of that, it needs to be really clear to our candidates moving forward what the responsibilities are for them and for the program during the time that they're serving on that PSVTW. So here they are out in the employer world working on a variable term waiver, and you haven't yet recommended them for their full credential. What are their responsibilities still in order to earn that full credential? We don't want anyone falling through the cracks during this time. And then providing clear expectations to your program supervisors. So you have this virtual world where you are supporting individuals who may or may not be employed on a variable term waiver. Where does the supervisor, what's their role? What's their responsibility, and how do they, how are they supporting their candidates moving forward? So that needs to be clear as part of your program requirements. And next slide. So more responsibilities for the program. So there's 3 options here. You'll see ORs at the end of each of those 3 bullets. But basically it comes down to candidate support. How are we supporting our candidates? You can identify a faculty supervisor individual who is holding virtual office hours at least twice a week for their candidates, so they can ask questions about their clinical practice and completion of program requirements and questions about their placement within their candidate practice. Or you might have identified a faculty or supervisor who responds to questions as they come in a timely manner for anything that that they have questions about when they receive that PSVTW, or they have questions about their progress towards their program completion. These are the types of questions they may have, and you need to be available as a program to have those answers in a timely manner for your candidates. Or another thing that may occur, because once again I said it comes down to supporting the candidate, another opportunity that you have would be to set up a professional learning community. So you can have your candidates join together in a virtual environment, and maybe that's facilitated by the program, and they can interact one-on-one or with multiple points of contact all at once, so they can share their questions and support one another and solve problems together. So the other program responsibility would be to maintain communication with those individuals leadership positions within the districts where your PSVTW candidates are employed. You want to, employers may be contacting you as well, asking you what requirements does this individual have left to complete on their program, because that may be part of what they want to keep track of as an employer, to see if that individual is on target and how much they have left to complete, and supporting them as well as you supporting them. So keeping open those lines of communication and what you have available for that employer to contact you. So thinking about mailboxes that you may need to start, or virtual environments that you need to create. So then additional program responsibilities. Remember, I said you're going to have a lot. So here are more. So you have, this is true for PPS programs and SLP programs. The preparation programs themselves, they need to identify what they've done to create a more flexible program during this COVID-19 crisis. So Terry Clark just went over with you what the minimum requirements are based on Title V regulations, and what the current requirements are in program standards. And so you can see now that you have the option of some flexibility for creating a more flexible program requirements for recommending candidates for a credential within your program. But you need to keep track of what you designed, and you need that for your accreditation. And so when you are visited for a site visit, for example, you need to be able to show documentation of what you did to create flexibility within your program. Once again, those numbers that Terry shared are the minimum. It's up to you as a program to decide how you're going to design your program, what flexibilities you will offer within your program. Program flexibility is encouraged during COVID-19, but ultimately it's your decision as long as you meet those minimum amounts that we went over. You are responsible for clinical practice requirements, and making sure that those individuals meet the Title V requirements on the last slide we just went over. And I spent so much time talking about the previous bullet, I covered both. And then we have our clear options to candidates regarding how to complete the remaining necessary requirements. You might think of doing a form or something that is really clearly outlines to the candidate what they have left to do, what the requirements they have to do, because it's not going to be the same if you created a flexible program. Suddenly their requirements have changed. But where are they within their program? Within the new flexible options within your program, what do they have left to complete? What do they need to be recommended by you for their credential? That's your responsibility to give your candidate. So now we'll talk about some candidate responsibilities. Besides, of course, completing the program and all the work that's entailed with that, what else do they need to do? They need to maintain an affiliation with you as a program. And that's so important. As you give them a recommendation for that variable term waiver, and they go out and they feel that they're employed by a school district, and they suddenly feel like they don't need to interact with you as a program anymore. And clearly, if you've recommended them for a variable term waiver, they still have program requirements, and we can't let them fall through the cracks. They're going to be really busy starting their new employment, but they need to maintain their affiliation with you as a program. They need to request that variable term waiver. Maybe they've gone on their own and obtained employment, but they need to request that variable term waiver from you. It's a PSVTW, that means program sponsored variable term waiver. So it needs to come through you, not their employer, which is how it normally comes through. Normally, that PSVTW, you want it to be, it's normally going to be issued for our PPS SLP candidates because their clinical practice was interrupted by COVID-19. And so we have a lot of students who, it took districts a long time to get the technology together, to get internet access and computers for all of their students and have them back up and running. And so during that time, And some school districts haven't even restarted services yet. They've just restarted the classroom experience virtually, but they haven't moved forward with providing the virtual services. So the clinical practice has been interrupted for our candidates in our services programs. And because of that interruption, you need to think about how you can provide opportunities for the candidates to complete their clinical practice requirement. And then they need to complete their remaining requirements in order to earn that, both within that first year of employment on the PSVTW, and then just overall, they need to be completing those requirements and keeping affiliated with you with their questions and regarding program completion of requirements. All that needs to come through you. So employer responsibilities. There are two primary responsibilities for our employers. One, they need to identify a program staff member to maintain the PSVTW holder records and what those individuals need to complete their program. So they need to keep track of their PSVTWs. They're used to VTWs, but they're not the same. PSVTWs, program sponsor recommended ones, don't go through the employer. They come through you for recommendation. And so they need to keep track of those individuals, know that they're on a PSVTW, know when their end date is on that document, and know what the requirements are for them to complete still in their program to be recommended for their credential. They need to think about how they can support those candidates because they are not fully credentialed. So how do they support those candidates along with how the program supports them? They need to maintain partnerships with the programs to, as said, providing adequate support. It's going to be so important to provide support needed for these variable term waiver candidates because they are not fully credentialed. And providing accurate information to the candidates, making sure that that's happening. Next slide. Oh, not me anymore.
Okay, so as we mentioned, there's a lot of things happening and we're trying to keep the information as updated as possible for you. So there's a dedicated COVID-19 webpage on the Commission website, and that has links to the specific areas. Any action taken by the Commission, there's a link there that'll take you directly to that. And then if you have not subscribed to the PSDE news, you definitely want to go ahead and subscribe to that. It comes out every Friday, and the link is there. You can click on that, put in your email address. That is where we put updates for all programs, or once these webinars get posted, we will put the links there in the PSDE news. So that's going to be a really, really good resource for you moving forward with that once a week check-in on Fridays. And then as we get new direction from state and public health officials, anything new that's announced, we will, of course, update our guidance accordingly and then post it on the COVID-19 section on our website. And here's some additional outside resources. So I won't talk about each of the links there, but you can click on those. We're really hoping to use a team approach in all of this to get us all through this, to get our candidates through this. And those are some links you can take a look at there. Okay, candidate questions. So candidate questions are coming into the CTC email boxes. To assist us with that, we would really ask that you direct your candidates to address any questions they might have to the program itself. And you can share CTC's COVID-19 resources with them. If you have any internal communications that could benefit your candidates in answering their questions. But they really should be contacting you as the program for questions they have on how this is going to affect their completion of the program, because we know that each program may be addressing this slightly differently within the guidelines that we're giving. So it's really most appropriate that they are asking you those questions so that we're not giving them any guidance that is contradictory to what your program is telling them. Okay, so here's some email addresses. For general questions, if you don't know exactly who to send it to, you can send those to psdinfo@ctc.ca.gov. If it's specific to program accreditation, you can send it to that email address. For your PPS questions, you can send those to either one of my colleagues, Karen Sacramento or Roxanne Purdue. Those email addresses are there for you. And of course, I'm the contact for the SLP programs. You should all have my email address already. And then if there's candidate-specific credentialing questions, those can be emailed to credentials@ctc.ca.gov. And now we are going to take some specific questions and answers and provide you with those answers if we have them. And if we do not have them, we will make sure to get them posted. And it's appreciated if you can try to keep your questions open to the general audience. As if we get too candidate specific, it may just not apply to everyone here who's listening.
And to be able to ask a question, if you will raise your hand, if you look, there's the raise the hand feature. If you raise your hand, we'll unmute you and call on you. Shira, I've unmuted you. Please go ahead and unmute and share your question.
Great, thank you. So my question is, for students who, like I thought based on this direction, sorry, we could choose either to follow the national guidance or the commission-related guidance. But then there were further answers that if the National Association has not reduced the number of hours, then the CTC is not doing so. So if we're not affiliated with KCREP at this time, does that mean that regardless, students would have to complete the 600 hours, which is in the standards, instead of the 450, which is in the regulatory, so the regulatory language hours? Does that make sense? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And unfortunately, I think it's accurate. The request to the commission was to give programs flexibility to make decisions, and that the programs would look at the guidance from the National Association, because staff is not knowledgeable about all 5 of these credential areas, 4 PPS and 1 SLP. We don't have in-depth knowledge for all of these areas. So we said the best advice we have is what is the National Association saying? And the National Association for School Counseling did not go. They specifically said 600 hours is still what's required. But remember, it is flexible hours. Telepractice hours do count. But this may mean a few more counselors have to be on PSS VTWs than maybe we had hoped.
Right, because some districts have refused to allow their trainees to continue. So that's like some of the experiences that many of us are facing in our programs, that the districts have said, no, that's a non-starter for trainees to continue. They're barely meeting with the school counselor. So our students haven't been able to collect the hours.
And are there any other simulations or other things you could do for your candidates to accrue hours?
We have offered additional guidance around that. So simulations, attending additional trainings, things of that nature, but they're not the synchronous types of engagement, unfortunately. So it's not all students, but there are several. So that's why I was asking that question. Thank you.
If anyone else has some suggestions for Shira for counseling, please raise your hand and be able to share them. Brad, go ahead and ask your question. I'm sorry, Karen, did you have something first?
I was just going to add to what you said in terms of this. Certainly, we are seeing across the state that teachers often are continuing to teach through technology, often through Zoom or another platform. And I have heard of counselors being able to participate in those classroom settings in different ways. So that may be an avenue to pursue when candidates can't participate in direct counseling because they have been not included in those counseling services, or the counseling services aren't very active. Maybe actually through the classroom setting and working with students in that way, working with teachers.
And right before Brad goes and shares, remember only 300 hours have to be direct contact with pupils, which are the synchronous approach. It's possible something asynchronous can be for some of those other 300 hours. Brad, you're on.
Thank you for taking my question. So my question is along the lines of the previous question about the Ed Code 450 hours versus the program standard set at 600 hours in school counseling, and the difference between program flexibility and variable term waivers. So for example, let's say we're dealing with an institution that does not have national accreditation on their program. They have a candidate who met the 450 Ed Code hours, and that candidate has demonstrated all the needed competencies. So are we able to use program flexibility in that instance to say, you know, this person, we can recommend them for a PPS credential versus the variable term waiver in that instance, or is that an inappropriate use of that flexibility?
The flexibility for school counseling is restricted by what KCREP has done, even for an institution that is not KCREP accredited. That said, so counseling programs need to have 600 hours. I see now this slide here needs to be even more complex. I need to put another set of hours for what the professional association has said, which I did not include. I thought I did pretty well to make it as clear as it was. Remember, though, that there are some flexibilities, such as what counts as hours. Maybe one of your candidates has done something, I can't even say what. Maybe they went to outdoor ed camp or something. Maybe they've done some things that you can say are equivalent to a certain number of hours of field practice. You do have equivalencies, and that's on a case-by-case basis. But in the counseling world, the commission did say there's flexibility, but they said the flexibility has to be in alignment with the National Association, which is KCREP.
Thank you for the clarification. So they need the 600 hours, and what could fly might be some alternative types of field experience as deemed by the program as equivalent, but bottom line, it's 600 hours.
Perfect.
Okay,
well summarized. Suzanne, you've been unmuted. Suzanne Whitehead, can you share your question?
Sorry. Hi, everybody. I'm just concerned about trying to get all the standards changed and ready by the January 21st deadline for the school counseling PPS. I have not been able to go on campus since March 16th. All of my materials are there, everything that I need to, you know, change to all the standards and take on 3 new courses in addition. It looks like we won't be able to go on this summer, and now we're talking about possibly into the fall. So I'm just very concerned about that deadline and meeting it. I don't want to do this, certainly, you know, not as professionally and up to date as it needs to be. So I wondered if there's any conversation about that.
There's been a lot of conversation. We are talking all the time about this, and as I think Karen mentioned earlier, we've been trying to deal with the things that we had to deal with immediately, such as the people who are supposed to be completing this month and next month. We are definitely open to pushing the deadline back. We want to be reasonable. We also know that we want the programs to be moving to the new standards. So what we wanted to do was let everyone have some time to settle in. Once we got past kind of the crisis of the pandemic and we get into kind of the more normal day-to-day living in a pandemic. And so hearing from you that the January 31st deadline is stressful for you is helpful. We may very well do a survey or something. If there are programs that are ready by January 31st, we'd like to take that information at that point. But we could also do something like say, we need it between January and March or something. So thank you for sharing, Suzanne. We'll see. We'll think about this some more and get back to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
There are no more hands up at the moment. If you have questions, please raise your hand and we're going to be happy to try to answer them.
I would just say, I see one question about how are employers going to know about this, and I just want to let the field know that the commission is really working hard to make sure that employers understand what the PSVTW is, and that these individuals were almost done with their program and they are ready to be hired with some additional support, and they need to complete a few remaining requirements. But, you know, we're working with AXA, we're working with other organizations, and I'm sure we'll be putting out some communication to the field so that employers understand who these people are, and that it is different from the previous VTWs. It's different than the preliminary folks, that they are really a unique set of candidates.
Really good point, Cheryl. Thank you. Jean, I've unmuted you.
Thank you. We've been looking primarily what would be the end of a program, but we have students who are also paid when they go out in their internship. Would the same kind of guidance be, only we would relate it back to their practicum time and going into an internship? Can they get the P, whatever it is, for doing their internships when they are paid?
Yes, the commission is silent on the issue of compensation. That is between the individual and the employer and the prep program. The PSVTW will give them the authorization to do to provide the services for which they've been prepared, and whether they're paid or not is not in the commission's area of responsibility.
Thank you.
Shira, I've unmuted you.
Thank you. Will the PSVTW for CBEST only, so they've met all other requirements except for passage of the CBEST, require clinical practice and like formal affiliation with the program? Will that be a requirement?
Every PSVTW has only the specific remaining requirements left to accomplish. So if the candidate has truly done everything but CBEST and they're on a PSVTW, the only affiliation you're remaining with them is to keep in contact with them to know when they've passed the CBEST, so then you can recommend them for their school counseling credential. Okay,
but no like formal, you have to be somewhat enrolled. Okay,
affiliated, not necessarily in a class.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca, I've unmuted you.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you for your time in this explanation. I appreciate it. Two things. The first, I just want to second that our programs could also use additional time to transition to the new standards. Our transitions reports are due sometime between the summer and January, and then we need to transition the following academic year, and it has been a trial to get that work going and started and continued without being in place. So I wanted to second that. The second piece, and apologies if this is a silly question, but I'm looking at the program standards and I'm having trouble finding language specifically for school psychology for the program that discusses the 300 direct hours and the 100 hours related to racial, ethnically diverse students or a background different from yourself. I don't see that specific number or language in the standards, like in standard 26, for example, on culminating field experience. I understand that it's in the Title V regulations, but I don't see those numbers called out, and I'm having trouble with those. So I wondered if the commission could explain that a bit.
Interesting. Because I'm managing the people right now, Karen or Cheryl or Roxanne, might you open the standards document? We were on Zoom because we're not allowed to be together either as we were working on this, and I thought the 300 and the 100 and the 100 was actually in there.
Yeah, let me look for it.
We're looking for it. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Did she mention which, I'm sorry, this is Erin Sullivan, which version of the standards is she looking at?
You should be at the 2004 version, right?
Okay.
Not the 2018 version. She
Right.
said standard 26, so that's why I assumed she was in the right version.
I think it's in like standard 24, 25. I can't, there's so many standards in that one. I always have to look at it.
But we are looking it up. Geeta, go ahead and ask your question while we're looking into standards.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the information. So I had a question. How long does it take to get the PSVTW, and how long is the period? Like if someone is finishing up in say 6 weeks, so will it state that after 6 weeks they have to apply for the regular certification? How does it work basically?
Okay. The PSVTW is a paper application. We were processing those as absolutely quickly as we can. In fact, right now we're trying to get all of the applications we have in-house processed to be ready to process the PSVTWs. If someone is going to be on a PSVTW, it's been suggested that the preparation program write them a letter on letterhead saying, such and such a candidate has finished the vast majority of the program. They're not able to do what? Whatever they're not able to do due to COVID. The institution will be recommending the candidate for a PSVTW, which will give them the authority to provide the services in classrooms in California. Give the candidate that letter to use in their EdJoin file so that they can look for a job. If someone doesn't have a job, they don't really need a PSVTW because the PSVTW lets you provide the counseling services or the school psychology services or the school social work services or the speech language pathology services. And remember, the VTW has a 1-year validity period. So if you were to apply for a PSVTW on June 5th, it will expire on June 5th of 2021. If you apply for the PSVTW on August 5th, it won't expire till August 5th of 2021. Okay. And so we are going to hope to process as absolutely quickly as we can. And once it's been submitted, we will have on our webpage how long our processing time is taking.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone have any standards yet we should provide information on or not yet?
Well, standard 25 has some specificity, but it's not exactly like what's in the chart. So I think we need to look at the chart a little closer.
We may have to update the chart.
Yeah, the 300 is there. So 300 clock hours in a preschool grade 12, providing direct, now that says direct and indirect pupil services. The 450 is definitely there. So I think we have to look at a few things here.
I'm trying to look at this.
Oh, wait. Okay, wait. I'm looking at the right one. Let's see. School
Standard 31
for
school counseling.
Yeah, 300. So look at page 79. Am I in the right? I wish we'd pull them apart. Because I can never tell if I'm in the right. Hold on 1 second. This is counseling.
Sonam, I've just promoted you to a panelist. Can you share anything more? I know you were looking in the standards document.
Yeah, I need to have them side by side.
Poonam, anything else you could share? You're a panelist now.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Little louder. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Barely. We're going to go to another question while we continue to work on this one. DMG, I've unmuted you. If you'll unmute your microphone and share your question.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Dominique Griffin, and I had a couple of questions. So is there going to be a cutoff date for when you will no longer accept the deferred VTW. So like, I know you're saying if we apply, say June 5th, they'll have until June 5th of 2021, but is there going to be a cutoff date for when they'll no longer accept the VTW? And once they get hired in their new position under the VTW, will they be able to be paid for that service? Well, in terms of counting those hours. So if they're being paid, would they still be able to count those hours for their master's, well, for the credential?
So that was a multi-piece question. The cutoff date is September 1st. The actions the commission took at the April meeting are to get us through this year's candidates, and they stopped September 1st. That doesn't mean the commission might not take action in June or at the August meeting to allow some of the similar flexibilities next year if needed. But for right now, the CBEST deferral has to be stated by September 1st, or the PSVTW has to be submitted by September 1st. And what was your next question?
In terms of if they get hired into a school counseling position, would they be able, and say they need to just continue with some of their hours, would they be able to count those hours towards their master's, or would they have to find like another opportunity to count hours?
Towards the master's degree is not the commission's area of expertise or responsibility. They can count the hours towards the remaining hours for the credential. Yes, that's why they're on the PSVTW.
Okay.
Tricia, go ahead and share your question.
Hello, thank you so much for taking my question. I just wanted to get some clarification on practicum students, since it's primarily been about interns. Are there any exceptions for practicum students regarding how many hours they must meet with students, I'm sorry, with pupils during the COVID-19?
Karen or Roxanne, do you have anything about that?
I don't believe there's a differentiation.
I don't either.
I don't, again, in the standards, it would be considered field practice, field experience. So from my knowledge, there's not a differentiation. I can certainly go back and double check that though.
I'm going to recommend that you email that one to Karen and I, just so that we can take a second look.
Second look and also have it in the FAQs.
Okay, because I know with school psychology, our students, practicum students get a minimum of 450 hours and the interns a minimum of 1,200. So I just wanted to see if there was something different, but nonetheless, I will.
Let us be sure to research that to give you, an absolutely correct answer. So
okay, I will do that. Thank you so much.
That brings up a really good point, because a lot of your programs, you've set things up and you've done them so many years, you may consider that that's the commission requirement. And so you really want to go back into the program standards and check with Karen or Roxanne, because that may be your programmatic requirement, but it might not be the commission standard requirement. Sherry, okay. I unmuted you. Can you share your question?
Hi, yes. I've been working in this business too long, obviously, and thanks for your help. But I would be on the side of an employer, and I'm wondering whether or not a temporary county certificate could be put against the C-19 type letter that you're saying that the universities should issue if the person is eligible for the variable term waiver document, so that we can go ahead and hire them, know their expectations, but still that the county office would put a temporary county certificate against this application that won't be granted for quite some time.
I think that's definitely a possibility. In a meeting today, I was told that we are at, get this, 12 processing days.
Really? With a paper application? That's amazing. That would be great.
And it won't stay that way as soon as these paper apps start coming in, but we are endeavoring not to go above 50 days. We're going to do our absolute best, but I think you've identified a really important option is the county can recommend and put the person on a TCC, a temporary county certificate. Your candidates should all hold certificates of clearance, which is one of the big issues. to make
Right.
sure they don't have any reasons they shouldn't be around children, and then they could be on a TCC.
Okay, I didn't catch the first presentation about the multiple and single credential holders or the eligibility of those people that we may hire. Would they also have those same expectations on their C-19 type letter that we would get of what that they still need to do, such as their CSET, CBEST, et cetera? And you're shaking your head yes. So yes, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Suzanne, can you share your question?
Got it. Okay, thank you so much for taking my question. So I am hearing and seeing in chat that 90 clock hours needed in a school setting for the SLP field experience. We've always thought it was 100 because that's what we thought was required. But in a pretty thorough search of CTC documents, I couldn't find anywhere anything about specific hours requirements for the school field experience for SLP. When the gentleman was speaking, William, you mentioned about needing a 1 semester or 1 quarter of experience, but nothing about specific hours. So my question is there a specific hours requirement for SLP in the schools?
There is not in the CTC standards or in the Title V regulations. It's just the quarter or semester that's mentioned in that program standard 6.
Okay, that's all I needed to know.
All right.
Thank you.
Sherry, do you have a question or
I do. I have one more question.
Go ahead.
You said that somebody within the district should be observing and making sure that part on our behalf that some of the requirements are being met, as well as university and communicating with them. What kind of position might that be that would be in the district? Would it be somebody like our curriculum director or
Lucy,
that
go
kind of thing, or a principal maybe?
It would be whoever is supervising that new employee. So depending upon the size of the district.
Okay. So it wouldn't necessarily be the credentials person, because in a district, of course, the credentials person doesn't just do credentials. Unfortunately, you know, they have many other hats. So we wouldn't see their hourly expectations being done. That's why I'm asking.
I don't think it would be a credentials person.
Okay, thank you.
Director of Student Services, if it's a high school, maybe a principal.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking too. Okay, thank you.
Terry, can I suggest that we take a look at this chart? We redo the chart. We're going to double check all the numbers, and we're going to add also the national accrediting body stuff, so that when we post this, it gets posted with a new chart. Would that be okay for everybody? Okay.
We will commit to doing that, and we'll even have it done by Wednesday.
Yeah.
I would just like to add, and then if there are follow-up questions about that, Roxanne and my emails, you can direct it to those. And I would just like to add one other thing. We are certainly seeing your comments about the transition document and the timeline. So I'm not answering all of those now, but we understand that there are many programs that are concerned about that transition timeline. So we will address that as staff and share more information about that.
Okay, did we already have Diane?
No, you unmuted me, so I was just waiting.
You're on.
Thank you. I did attend with my colleague the CTC information Zoom meeting in March 20th. So thank you again for holding this specifically for the PPS and addressing our questions. I just wanted to clarify real quick and go back on the 300 direct hours. I assume you mean literally physically in the presence of a pupil or online face-to-face with the synchronous counseling. But in the meeting, you also had mentioned that we can have, through the flexibility, we could have students watch videos or do simulations. If they are watching a counselor with a pupil, would that count as direct hours?
I don't think so, but let us talk about that and try to make it clear on the chart.
Yeah, I think our concern was, of course, we were all at that point back in March trying to be creative. So, trying to let students do the simulations and the videos and planning and reflecting and doing things to prep for certain counseling situations. So we were just concerned of meeting that 300 direct hours now that we are in this situation.
Veronica, I've unmuted you. Do you have a question?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Thank you. I was looking towards our next set of candidates who will be moving into their internship phase coming up this fall, trying to be prepared. Is there anything that we should start considering for them? Should we look at the PSVTW for them, or in preparation, since the pandemic is an ever-changing situation and we don't know if all schools are going to be in session for the fall, and or they may start for the fall and then we may end up back in quarantine. So is there any advice as to what we should start looking at and preparing for that set of candidates?
Yeah, the challenge for that is that the action the commission took was for the candidates who are completing between now and September. You've clearly identified an area where we need to take action. We need to take an item to the commission for the June meeting. If you could summarize your issues and your concerns about these new candidates in an email to me, Veronica, that would be so helpful, because clearly we're going to need to talk with the commission about what flexibilities might need to be in place for the 2021 year.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sherry, I've unmuted you if you have a question. And Rebecca, you're still with us, and you're the one who brought us to the hours question, which I think our answer now is we need to do some research and we'll get back to the chart later. So I don't think we have a better answer for that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Paul, go ahead. Your question? Paul, can you unmute?
Thank you so much. Thanks for hosting this. Just wanted to see if anyone thinks there will be a delay with the certificate of clearances this summer.
Our certificate of clearances, a CTC online document, or are they a paper document?
I believe it's been a paper document for the actual fingerprinting piece, but then it's, I believe, part of it might be online.
So, right, so the two steps. So the fingerprint, the live scan. We had heard that the live scan places weren't open, but in the search I did in the Sacramento area, the live scan centers are open. Some of them are open slightly fewer hours, but they are open. And so I don't think there should be a slowdown in the certificate of clearance process.
Thank you so much.
There's 11 more minutes, and right now there are no hands raised.
So I've seen a lot of comments about the transition to the new standards, and I think that's one that we could definitely take under consideration because, you know, we're all trying to deal with the current situation. We're then trying to deal with the new candidates next year and next. So it makes some sense. We just need to figure out how that will all roll out. But I'm seeing a lot of that in the chat.
And definitely please remember that everything we're talking about today is accurate on May 4th. Things could change on May 10th or June something. and then we might have different guidance or advice. Okay, Trisha, I've unmuted you. Go ahead.
Quick question. Is there a fee for our students who will be applying for the PSVTW? I want to make sure I get the language right.
And actually, there's a great document on the COVID-19 Action webpage.
Okay.
I did not have a chance yet to put it in the chat because once I started facilitating questions, I haven't been able to answer questions, but there's a document there, guidance on the program sponsor VTW. It tells you all the information. The commission is required by regulation to charge a $100 fee when it does a transaction, and a PSVTW is a transaction, so I'm afraid there is a fee.
Okay, thank you very much.
M. Cox, go ahead, ask your question, please. M. Cox, you need to turn your microphone on, probably in the lower left-hand corner, and then you should be able to ask your question.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. So for those students who are required to take a competency exam that is usually given at one of the testing centers that are closed due to COVID-19, is this something that would cover them under the variable term waiver?
That's exactly one of the reasons. So I know some programs use a praxis exam, and yes, the PSVTW would definitely be a time you could do that. Now remember, that exam is actually your programmatic requirement. It's not a credential requirement.
Yes. Good, thank you.
Tamara, go ahead.
I was wondering what constitutes a simulation, if there's a document that talks about that, or if you all could just let us know what that means.
Anyone on staff want to jump right in here?
Well, I just to give a break to Terry, I mean, maybe the programs have a better idea, but we've seen it in the teaching world where there's actual stimulations, videos, even artificial intelligence of some sort, where a candidate interacts with a particular characteristic that is, stands in for a student, and how they would address those particular needs or those particular learning environments. And I don't know how that translates into the PPS world, but maybe, those of you who are experts are able to share some documentation. It is an area in which the teaching field is using quite a bit more and more that we're beginning to see it. But.
And Cheryl, I've also seen simulations that have been set up by the program where the program faculty member serves as the student to sort of role play out a simulation. So that's another possibility.
Terry Sayens, I've unmuted you. Would you like to share?
Yes. I wanted to know William Hattrick's email because he's the SLP specialist, and that's my area. Also, for SLP programs, we do have a commercial simulation program that we are currently using at Cal State Fullerton called SimuCase, and it has 97 hours in total of simulations, of which 75 per student are allowed by ASHA.
Excellent. So the PowerPoint slides gone back to William's email.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Emails here at the commission are always our first initial and then our last name at ctc.ca.gov. Diana Taylor, do you have some more information on simulations for us?
No, I had another comment about California Ed Code 49600, however.
Oh, hold on just a minute then. Let's see. I want to see if anyone else have anything about sources for simulations. Paul submitted that the Poverty Simulation Lab has used, and he, for between teachers, administrators, and school social workers. Tamara, that's about what we've got for you right now, it sounds like, okay?
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.
Let's see, Gail. Gail, do you have anything to help us with simulations?
Yes, I've been using this for one of my classes that I'm teaching online in micro skills of counseling, where some of the students who have others that they're sheltering in place with, or they have relatives that they're doing practice counseling sessions with cousins and teenagers in their house and children, and then they're videotaping that via Zoom, and then they're sending it for my review and feedback. So I would think that something like that might also be possible.
I would just encourage you to think about permissions and appropriate use of those recordings, of course.
Yes, they have to show me that they got permission, and then those are not those are sent to me only, and I don't have a way to save them or anything like that.
Super.
I would just add, as programs think about this, it would be a strong collegial opportunity to share what you do have as experts, what kind of flexibility you are looking at using and are currently using. I think you're the best source to share information with each other because of current practices that you're doing.
Karen and Roxanne, do we have our new PPS webpage up? We do, don't we?
Yes, we do.
So if any of you have information for PPS, this isn't SLP right here, but if you have PPS information where you have resources, we could put that information on on our PPS webpage, because there is a webpage now dedicated specifically to the Pupil Personnel Services programs, and I'll put that in the chat. Diana, go ahead.
It's Dion.
Dion, I'm sorry.
That's okay. In California Ed Code 49600, that we all know very well, the first paragraph starts with school districts may provide a comprehensive counseling program. And that's just been something that's been stuck in my brain for the last 21 years. Is there any way that we can advocate to use more definitive language, which I think would bring greater support for school counselors throughout our state in advising or a change to that language?
I think the Counseling Association is definitely supportive of that. It's an ed code. You need a legislator to carry a bill.
Okay. I'll look into that. Thank you.
Excellent. Anyone whose hand is up, I think you've already shared. Are there any other hands? We are pretty much at 3 o'clock. I want to thank you all so much for joining. Oh, wait, here's a hand. Well, no, I lost that hand. Here's a hand again. Song, go ahead, Song.
I'm sorry. Thank you for everything. In terms of equivalency for hours, you said we can determine what is equivalent to counseling hours, school counseling hours. Can you clarify what that means? Because a lot of our students who do substitute teaching, who do coaching, are saying, well, we provide counseling to those individuals. So are those type of hours okay to be substituted?
I'm going to also put this in the Q&A for the end. There is an equivalency document on our webpage. You have to, every commission-approved program has the responsibility, but also the right, to look at items that the candidate has said or knowledge the candidate has and determine what is equivalent. And so you cannot just do it, because they say it's good. The candidate has to be able to bring you enough documentation and support. So I don't think substitute teaching counts necessarily, but let's say that the candidate, as part of being at a school, has set up a noontime session where students come in, and this happened 12 weeks, and they could document the purposes, then that might be something that is appropriate to be looked at for equivalency. But please go to the equivalency document and consult it before you just start granting equivalencies for things. See if that would help.
Thank you.
Terry, can I add?
Go ahead.
Not related to that. I was just going to say that if you did ask a question in the Zoom chat and it didn't get answered, we are going to be going through all of those and crafting Q&As. So you don't have to, I'm getting emails separately, a number of them saying that questions didn't get answered. We will go ahead and go through those chat questions. If you have questions that weren't asked and you want to send those to us, please go ahead and feel free to email those. But we'll go back. I know we didn't get to every single one that was asked, and we will address those topics in the FAQs.
Okay, Steve Hayden, and I think you're our last question or comment.
Yeah. Sorry, Terry, it's not a question. The individual who was just describing the client simulations, I think with family or something, I'm not sure I made that out, but I want to know if she might be able to share her email. I wouldn't mind following up with her about that.
If you shared about that, could you raise your hand? Gail, was that you?
Yes. My email is, it's a long one, sorry. It's UELLENDA@CalLutheran, that's CalLutheran.edu.
And it appears Dan outed your email in the Q&A chat
but
area.
I think there was a mistake in the, it was missing the A at the end of my name.
Missing the A before the @ symbol.
Yes, yes. Was that clear?
I will copy it and put the A in.
Yes, it's okay. It's okay.
Now it's there.
Yeah, I'd be happy to chat with you.
We know this is a challenging time for all of us. Please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and let us know if you have questions or suggestions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.